Good evening. I'm Faith Goldy in for Michael Koren. Less talk and more action in Ukraine. That's the topic of tonight's arena. Sitting face to face but not seeing eye to eye, Secretary of State John Kerry met with his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov on Sunday. Must have been an awkward afternoon around the diplomatic drawing board, way I see it. 4 hours of Kerry pleading, "Oh, pretty please, won't you pull back your troops?" Only to be met with Sergei's, "Oh, I'll take that to Kremlin. In meantime, why don't we turn Ukraine into federation? You divide, we conquer." But in Diplo speak, that translates to this.
The U.S. and Russia have differences of opinion about the events that led to this crisis. But both of us recognize the importance of finding a diplomatic solution and of simultaneously meeting the needs of the Ukrainian people, and that we agreed on.
4 whole hours of soft power talks without a single Ukrainian at the table. Another conversation and not a thing accomplished. Diplomatic isolation, asset freezes, travel bans on oligarchs, even angry Obama phone calls to Moscow were appropriate at a time, but objectively ineffective now. Mr. Putin laughed off U.S. sanctions that targeted his inner circle, promising the Ukrainian government would, quote, have the back of those on the list. And did you hear? Vlad ordered fireworks over Moscow after the second round of U.S. economic sanctions. Look, I've never been one to argue give war a chance. So, well-meaning bleats aimed at painting me as a neocon, well, you can all remain calm. But you'll forgive me if I just don't get what kind of playbook the White House is employing. It's no secret that Obama's no foreign policy president. Compounding the problem, Putin knows his record. Obama gave up Bush's win in Iraq, even helped topple slavish American allies in Egypt and in Libya. And Putin himself has taunted Obama in Iran, in Syria, and even with Edward Snowden. But this leader's game of cat and mouse is unlike the others. It is much, much worse. Quite apart from the humanitarian catastrophe in Ukraine, where dozens are missing and tens of thousands of Russians, Ukrainians, and Tatars have been turned into political refugees, the invasion of Crimea by the expansionist Russian Federation marks the destruction of the present system of international relations and public law. Either Obama is in denial of these facts or he is perfectly incompetent. To be sure, the probability of war in Ukraine's southeast region is high. When Russia invaded Crimea, it mobilized 50,000 troops along Ukraine's eastern frontier. Most of those forces, by the way, still terrorize Ukraine. Never mind Putin's pullback promise to German Chancellor Angela Merkel on Monday. Some 20,000 troops still occupy the peninsula, and provocateurs sent by Moscow continue to stir unrest. And like a holy hangover of the region's Soviet past, Ukrainian Catholics are completely paralyzed in the occupied territory, where priests in Crimea have been kidnapped, accused of being Vatican agents by Russian supporters. For Putin, the Cold War ended, as he put it, tragically. He will turn back the clock as far as intimidation through military power, economic leverage, and Western inaction will allow. And with 15 times the cash being dumped into their annual defense budget, Vlad has the military and economic power he needs to successfully crush Ukraine and her people. See, while the world leaders were busy drawing down troops and spending less on security, Russia has actually been increasing her military might since the Cold War. Today, the Russian army is virtually unopposed in Central Europe. And now an ex-Kremlin aide warns Putin wants to annex Finland, Belarus, and the Baltics. I, for one, believe him. The immediate concern for the world must be to show Russia that further moves will not be tolerated, and that Ukraine's territorial integrity is indeed sacrosanct. Putin is a narcissistic sociopath, a megalomaniac. Like the bully on the playground, he does not respond to soft power, to reason or arguments. Putin must face a threat of physical force in order to even consider changing course. Hard power fighting hard power. So, who should supply that muscle? No country can on its own. Look here. Obama's indebted America is not a reliable ally or a consistent power. When the interim Ukrainian Prime Minister met Obama, his request for weapons was politely declined. Instead, the Obama administration offered uniforms and military meals, as if Ukraine was going to the garrison ball. And forget handicapped Europe, she's welcomed tens of billions in dirty money from the who's who of Russia's most unsavory businessmen, all along doing little to wean herself from Russian oil and natural gas. And our PM, despite leading the class in harsh rhetoric, well, he's totally abandoned the traditional conservative buildup of armed forces and defense industries. Canada might talk the talk, but we can't walk the walk. So, only NATO is apt to provide a robust defensive strategy and lift the Ukrainian military out of its present isolation. But Ukraine is not a NATO nation, you say. Oh, that's right. But why aren't they? Following the Georgian crisis, Obama's Russian reset led to an abrupt revision of plans. Talk of Ukraine and Georgia's future in NATO ceased. Moscow, well, it cheered. To avoid consensus building and sticky precedent, a NATO coalition of the willing ought to be formed and 3 actions taken. First, the Ukrainian PM's request for military equipment should be immediately approved. And above that, anti-tank and anti-aircraft weapons should be included. These weapons will complicate Russian military planning and add risk to the tyrannical operations there. And as a point of taste, U.S. equipment might bring back some unpleasant memories of when Soviet forces encountered Western weapons in Afghanistan. Second, the alliance should deploy intelligence capabilities and military trainers to Ukraine. The deployment of military trainers to Georgia was one of the most effective elements of the U.S. effort to bolster Georgia's security after it was invaded by Russia in 2008. Third, NATO allies and partners should soon conduct a military exercise in Ukraine as part of the effort to train the Ukrainian military. The alliance's plan to wait until the next scheduled exercise in Ukraine this summer, well, that could incentivize Russia to take additional military action before then. Ukraine is our Sudetenland and Russia our Berlin. The same dynamics are at play. Barefaced racism, xenophobia, a violent nationalism, unbending to moral scrutiny. The reproduction of lies by ranting lawmakers. Appeasement didn't work then, and it's already not working now. Enough of round tables and photo op statesmen, less talk and more spark for 46 million Ukrainians. For the balance of power in this world, and for freedom. Anything less won't satisfy me.
Unfortunately, I cannot confirm that Russia is withdrawing its troops. This is not what we are seeing. And this massive military buildup can in no way contribute to a de-escalation of the situation.
That there was NATO head Rasmussen announcing today that NATO would sever ties with Russia for the time being, but they're still interested in a diplomatic solution. Joining me now, Straight Talk contributor and Ukraine expert, John Mraz. John, I just mentioned that Ukraine is our Sudetenland and Russia is our Berlin. Folks at home might be saying, whoa, hold on there. That's an overstatement. Is it, in your opinion?
Well, being Czech by origin, my last name being Mraz, I was taught this history with intensity when I was young. And I think the comparison is eerily apt at this point. As I recall, the Munich appeasement, which allowed Britain to say yes to imperialist Nazi Germany and agree that the Czechoslovakian state should be broken up into republics, and even sort of agreeing to the fact that the Czechs had perhaps been abusing Germans and thereby the annexation of the Sudetenland was a legitimate move to protect German nationals' interests in a foreign hostile country, is eerily similar of course, all the arguments that Putin made to take Crimea. And by the way, Crimea is gone.
Oh, 100%, yeah.
It is gone. And yet there's still rhetoric, we're going to get it back, that the United States is at a table for 4 hours, and I can only think, when I watch Putin, he must be enjoying this. To me, it looks like he is just bamboozling the West. You're calling Kerry back, Kerry changes his flight, he arrives at the table, and for 4 hours, the only thing that Lavrov will talk about, the only thing he'll talk about is what Ukraine has to do to stop the 50,000 troops at its border from invading, as if they had invited that neo-imperialist aggression. The very fact that America comes to the table creates the paradigm, the narrative, the set, the frame that Putin is looking for, which is that this is a world clash of empires, and that countries like Ukraine are immaterial. They don't even need to be at the table. These are pieces on the board to be taken and exchanged between empires. He's judged Obama to be weak, and he's winning the chess game right now.
Now, getting to that diplomatic meeting there, Lavrov suggested that federating Ukraine, making it a federation of sorts, would be the solution here. What do you make of that?
Well, it's exactly what they asked. It's exactly what Hitler asked. And I hate comparisons to Hitler. I mean, I always think when you get to Hitler, there's really no further to go. But if you look at the model he's using, it is the exact same model. He's saying Ukraine should be broken up into its, I believe it's 26, well, now 25 oblasts, which is a word for province. And they should all decide whether they want to be with the Russians or be independent or be Ukrainian or be whatever they'll be. But of course, it's very simple. Chinese military tactics go back to the end of the war. Divide and conquer.
Now, one of the reasons why I ask you specifically to be on here is because, Mraz, I think that you and I are two of the only voices, at least in Canada, that are calling for an arming of the folks there, of real hard assets, material assets within Ukraine. Why is that necessary? Explain to the person at home who says, Russia shouldn't be in there, but neither should we. I don't want anything to do with this mess.
I've been frustrated by much of the Canadian press. There are strong, informed voices in Ottawa, in the Ukrainian Canadian Congress that are calling for the exact same thing. They're not being heard in a lot of the media. I think we've come to a point in the West and the media where there's no question we're war weary. I mean, after Iraq, after Afghanistan, and I don't want to lay blame or fault anywhere, it doesn't make any sense. Both left and right got those ones wrong in the end. People are frightened of the economic repercussions of putting boots on the ground, of engaging in what would be, if we do go in with NATO, we're a member of NATO. That's a European war if we're going to actually put hard force to hard force. And they're also frightened of the failure. Finally, Obama has less Ukrainian Americans than we have Ukrainian Canadians here. And so his local politics are, I mean, it's less than 1% of the US population. Do Americans really care? Do they relate to Ukraine? I don't think they think of it as Europe. It is Europe, but I don't think they think of it as Europe. They think of it as sort of a foreign place that's always been Russian. And I hear even smart people, I mean, there have been members of my party, the Liberal Party of Canada, who said, maybe we should just accept that this is part of, Churchill once said that without Ukraine, Russian empire is nothing, or something to that effect, I annotate. So is there the local political will? And does Obama have the will? And you think he might. He doesn't have to get elected again.
But the problem is with the $17 trillion debt, it becomes a global security problem. Really quickly, I want to ask you, today we saw NATO say we're severing ties with Russia for now. Is this possibly a positive step forward towards actually NATO involvement in a military sense in Ukraine?
Well, I mean, I think what they're really saying is we won't play soldier with you anymore. I mean, yes. I mean, one of the reasons that NATO engaged with Russia and with Ukraine historically was to take down the volume and the heat right after the Soviet Union collapsed, and it was probably a smart move. Perhaps Putin has given us one gift, though. If we do decide to fulfill those three things you talked about, which is send weapons, advisors, and arm. If we do that, perhaps NATO will wake up and have some real meaning for our generation, as it perhaps doesn't anymore. And perhaps we should realize Russia will probably never be our real friend.
It'd be about time. That's what I'd say. Thanks very much, Mraz.
Thank you.